Ahoy, friends, and welcome aboard. If you're new here, my name is Brian Cantrell, and this is the Pirate Republic. Starting today, I'm doing something a little different, maybe a little old-fashioned. I'm releasing the complete audiobook of Pirates of the Wild West, my first novel in the Storm of Time series, one chapter at a time, every week, right here in this podcast feed. No paywall, no lock, no key. Just a story told the way stories used to be told, out loud, over time, and shared freely. Now, if you enjoy the tale, if you're finding yourself looking forward to the next chapter each week, and you'd like to support the work, you can do so at my Patreon, The Pirate Republic. You can also go to any stores like Amazon or Barnes & Noble and buy hard copies of the book. If you want a signed copy of the book, you can find them at my website, briancantrell.com. The support that you give keeps the lights on and the cannons loaded and the stories continuing to sail. And you'll find a link in the show notes. But whether you support or simply listen, you're always welcome here. You're part of the crew. Always. But let me give you a teaser about this pirate time travel novel series. Pirates of the Wild West, in the first chapter, Before the Storm, there was a choice. The year was 1718, and Nassau stands as the last free pirate republic in the world. Blackbeard and most of the feared pirates of the Caribbean gathered aboard the Queen Anne's Revenge, summoned by an offer from the King of England himself, a royal pardon promising forgiveness, wealth, and a way out. Some see freedom, others smell a trap. But before a decision can be made, the sea intervenes. What begins as a parley between legends becomes something far stranger and far more dangerous than any navy or gallows. This is the beginning of a voyage that will bend history, fracture time, and drag pirates into a world that they were never meant to see. This is Pirates of the Wild West. Chapter 1, The Pardon. Nassau Harbor, 1718. Edward Thatch expertly lit the sweet-smelling tobacco that was packed into the bowl of his ivory pipe with the help of his tinderbox. It took a moment for his eyes to adjust back to the darkness of the night as he inhaled that first hit of head-clearing nicotine. The jolt to his heart rate felt satisfying, and he exhaled slowly and deliberately, watching the smoke dissipate into the night air. He carefully closed the tinderbox, waited a moment, then opened it again to ensure the mix of cotton and wax was completely snuffed. He knew all too well the consequence of carelessness when it came to fire management on a 200-ton frigate made almost entirely of wood. Even cooking in the galley required the exercise of great caution on a ship with 40 cannons, a hoard of gunpowder, and many gallons of flammable tar and oil that was used to waterproof the hull and sails. One had to be incredibly careful and have their sea legs about them to construct a meal using hot oil and grease, while constantly accounting for the roll and pitch of the unpredictable Caribbean Sea. Edward was well aware of the ban on smoking aboard ship, as he was the architect of the rule, but as captain of the Queen Anne's Revenge, he allowed himself a few liberties. There was also no one else aboard the Queen Anne's Revenge to hold him accountable for breaking his own rule. No one other than his first mate, Black Caesar, that is, who was currently below deck preparing for their arriving guests. The low rumble of thunder in the distance caused Edward to turn his head toward the open sea. The dark of night and the starless sky prevented him from seeing the coming storm clouds encroaching on the pirate republic city of Nassau. The occasional streak of lightning would illuminate the angry gray clouds covering the Caribbean like a billowing blanket. The sheeted trio of masts that lined the deck of his frigate were only now beginning to smack and clank in the wind. Thatch turned his eyes back to the small harbor as the lamplights of several tenders carrying passengers were rowed slowly toward his anchored ship. He took a puff from his pipe as he considered the parchment he had tucked into his belt. He had read its contents many times over, even out loud to the over 200 men under his command. They all had listened in rapt silence as he recited the official offer of a pardon from the King of England. Most, if not all, of his crew were illiterate, and in this part of the world most people couldn't read even a lick of the written word. Edward, however, was an educated man and a well-trained English Navy sailor. He had come to piracy after the war with Spain and France ended. Many of his ilk had taken the same path. Once the war ended and privateering against France and Spain was no longer sanctioned by the English crown, there was no work for most of the sailors that were now stranded in the waters of the Caribbean. For many, privateering, or what they now considered piracy, was the only job they were qualified to do. It was truly the only job that was available to them. Thatch unrolled the parchment to read over the details again, but found it impossible in the low light of the evening. In truth, he could recite the words from memory now, after so many readings. The idea that that damned German King George I would honor the pardon was difficult to believe after an entire year of Thatch and his cohorts raiding England's merchant ships. The King of England's pardon granted indemnity from all acts of previous piracy and crimes, as well as the rights to keep all plundered loot and assets obtained prior to the signing of the contract. He and his crew had quite a haul on board, as well as in the pockets of each member when they disembarked to enjoy the spoils in the capital city of the pirate kingdom. Edward smirked as he imagined the debauchery that was taking place in the lively drinking holes of Nassau. He himself would have joined his crew if it had not been for this call to parley between the reigning pirate captains. The message he had received upon arriving into the harbor from his old commander Benjamin Hornigold contended that there was some urgency to the discussion on the signing of the contract. The urgency probably had something to do with the 3 British Navy ships that now sat in the crowded harbor. The heavy footfall of Black Caesar sounded behind him as the dark and imposingly large man climbed up the stairs from midships. "Everything prepared below for our guests?" Thatch asked, without turning from the vision of the small boats just moments from arriving. "It is, and me brought your armament." Black Caesar held out the belts and holstered weapons he carried in his large hands. Edward Thatch made short work of the buckles and straps to adorn himself with 4 ornate 7-inch flintlock pistols held tight against his chest, 2 polished and sharpened cutlasses scabbarded on each hip, several daggers clinging to various belts and boot straps, along with a prized 26.5-inch blunderbuss within easy reach hooked to his waist. Black Caesar gave a nod of approval to his captain and adjusted his own plethora of personal armaments. Thatch tapped his pipe against the railing, sending the smoldering tobacco into the warm Caribbean waters. "Drop a ladder for our brethren and gather 'em in the main hold," Thatch said as he strolled to the forecastle. "Aye, Captain," Black Caesar responded and made his way to the folded rope ladder waiting on the starboard side. The first drops of rain began to fall as the tenders arrived to tie off against the Queen Anne's Revenge. Black Caesar watched as the first man ascended the ladder and climbed over the top of the rail. His mood darkened as he took in the broad-built form of Henry Jennings. Jennings was a coarse, self-righteous, arrogant man that Black Caesar had the displeasure of knowing for about a year now. He was a man that only smiled maliciously, if at all. Jennings was a captain in the Royal Navy during the war, and a plantation owner on one of the islands that Black Caesar could never remember the name of. Jennings took in his surroundings as would a cat seeking its next mouse to make a meal of, as the Queen Anne's Revenge was the envy of all pirate ships. He looked right through Black Caesar as though he was just another fixture of the 200-ton frigate, another tool or mechanism that was just used to operate the vessel. Henry Jennings commanded the ship named Beersheba and spent most of his time sailing along the coasts of Florida and Jamaica, raiding shipwrecks and small merchant vessels. His sometime first mate, Charles Vane, followed him up, using Jennings's shoulder to steady himself. Jennings roughly brushed off Vane's hand, almost sending the half-drunk man sliding to the deck. As Vane recovered, he sent a smirk in Black Caesar's direction. "Where's Thatch?" Jennings questioned the empty deck of the ship, as he would not talk directly to a former slave such as Black Caesar. "Probably primping in his mirror like some sort of dandy," stated a slurring Vane. Black Caesar only waited silently for the rest to climb aboard. Next up was the young Sam Bellamy, with his long, coal-black hair and dashing good looks. Sam, in just a few short months, had become one of the wealthiest pirates ever to sail. He and his crew had captured a returning English slave ship named the Ouida that was loaded down with a fortune in gold and ivory. His first mate, Palsgrave Williams, hopped easily to the deck next to Bellamy. "Yes, where is that old sea dog?" Sam said with a flash of bright white teeth that shone even in the dark of this night. Black Caesar clasped the outstretched hand of Bellamy, then of Palsgrave. "He waits below deck," said Black Caesar. Bart Roberts and Charlotte DeBerry boarded seconds later. The two only knew each other by reputation before this meeting, but found common tastes in their clothing and jewelry. They both had a fondness for crimson and wore waistcoats of the same shade. Bart Roberts wore an enormous diamond-crusted cross made from an unusual heavy silver metal with a pink hue that was plundered from a treasure destined for the King of France. Charlotte's mocha-colored skin was decorated with bracelets, rings, and necklaces of gold and brightly colored gemstones. The two were becoming fast friends, and Roberts offered an unnecessary hand for Charlotte to take when climbing up from the ladder. "A gentleman pirate. How disarming," Charlotte said, accepting Bart's hand. Roberts bowed with a flourish. "At your service, my lady. I find it best to be gracious when a beautiful woman ornaments herself with such finery as well as deadly accessories," Roberts said, glancing at the several dirks, blades, and other sharp instruments of death that adorned Charlotte's attire. Charlotte gave a knowing smile as she strolled past Roberts to join the others on deck. Bart smiled and gave Palsgrave a wink as they watched her pass before they both followed in her wake. Sam Bellamy leaned over the rail and whistled down at the next arriving boat. "Be quick about it, you sad lot. Are we to wait around, becoming drenched in this rain?" Bellamy called. The second ship to tie up held Benjamin Hornigold, Mary Reed, Anne and James Bonney, Calico Jack Rackham, Steed Bonnet, and several of their seconds in command. Once they were all on deck, their total numbers were 24. 24 of the most successful and feared pirates that had ever sailed the waters of the Caribbean. The deck of the Queen Anne's Revenge was gently swaying and becoming slick with rain under their thick leather boots. The wind was kicking up, and the raindrops were becoming larger and more consistent by the minute. "That's all? Then follow." Black Caesar led them all down the steps to the main hold. Flickering whale oil lanterns that lined the gangway guided them into the large hold that was lit by several lanterns whose flames danced, creating shadowy ghosts along the walls. The large hold was filled with treasures that would delight even the wealthiest merchant or duke of their age. The store held floor-to-ceiling stacks of commodity goods, chests yielding overflowing coin, jewelry, and ornate weapons. There were crates of rum and wine to tempt the thirst of the tavern-hungry sailors. Several spare cannon, pistols, and long rifles also lined the walls. Though these pirate captains were jaded by their own successes, they couldn't help but stare admiringly at the impressive haul of loot crowding the hold belonging to Thatch and his thriving band of pirates. Anne Bonny leaned comfortably against one of the polished wood beams in the spacious mid-deck hold of the Queen Anne's Revenge. Her husband, James, had told her earlier of the supreme craftsmanship of the vessel. It was certainly a prize to be envied by all the pirate captains gathered here. She glanced with disdain at James standing beside her, gawking overtly at the open boxes spilling over with linen finery, ivory and pewter and silver items. The rich, intoxicating smell of tobacco filled the room, no doubt wafting from the collection of burlap bags shelved floor to ceiling on one side of the room. She found that her stomach had turned lately when she was so close to James. Maybe it was his weak chin, or the paunch of his middle, his smell, the smell of a coward. She couldn't help but shake her head at the thought of all the opportunities James had to lead, yet he had always chosen to follow or to think. Her wild eyes drifted to the dashing figure of Jack Rackham standing aloof, preening his fingernails with an ornate stiletto. Her heart now leapt at the memory of the night they spent together after they had captured the Kingston off the shores of Port Royal. The Kingston was a fine sloop with 8 guns that now added to their growing fleet. Jack's thirst for adventure was only matched by her own, and it twisted her heart to be married to James, when her destiny was to be at Jack's side forever. The passion that had overtaken them that night was heard by the entire crew, and was now etched in the legend of their bold attack on the Kingston, within sight of all the merchants watching helplessly from the port. Jack slyly looked up from his grooming and drank in her copper-colored hair and exposed cleavage spilling from her open-topped men's shirt. If that same look had come from James, she would have shuddered with revulsion, but she now arched her back a bit and tossed her hair to one side. Anne's eyes reluctantly pulled away from Jack to observe the other occupants. Most were men, though beasts may have served them better as a simple description. 2 other women were present within the group, though, and she gave a quick nod to Mary Reed. Mary was standing next to Jack and was smirking at Anne, as she clearly had noticed the exchange that had taken place between them. Mary made a rude gesture in relation to James with her ringed pinky finger that caused Anne to stifle a giggle. The two women had been friends instantly when meeting, as they found themselves so like-minded. They both adopted the dress of their male counterparts, not to conceal the fact that they were women, as was clear by their ample breasts, but for the freedom of movement allowed by men's breeches, shirts, and coats. One needed to move quickly and efficiently on board a pirate ship, especially in battle. How fierce could one possibly be with both hands hiking up skirts to run from one side of the deck to the other? Anne unconsciously laid her hand on the handle of her sheathed machete and gazed at the third woman in the room. Charlotte de Barry barely glanced in Anne's direction. She had never been receptive to any advances that Anne ever made to her, friendly or otherwise. Charlotte's dark coffee-colored skin accented the array of bangles and bracelets that decorated her sleeveless arms. She too chose to wear breeches like Anne, but with knee-length soft leather boots. Her hair was braided long and ornamented with beads and colored glass jewels. Charlotte slouched back in a chair, tipping its front legs off the floor with the ease of a panther relaxing on a branch high above the forest. She was well known for her expertise with a blade that was almost like watching a trained dancer performing a ballet of death and mayhem. Anne watched as Charlotte tapped the ivory handle of her flintlock attached to her waist. Her long fingers moved in rhythm as if she were tapping along to a piece of music only she was hearing. Charlotte only carried one pistol on her person, unlike the rest of the gathered pirates who were outfitted with up to 10 such weapons, unwilling to risk the need to reload once engaged in a heated battle. This was most likely due to the fact that Charlotte de Barry was one of the worst shots that ever wielded a gun. Jack had commented once that it was probably because of her poor eyesight when it came to seeing anything more than a yardarm away. Bart Roberts eyed the lusty form of Charlotte de Barry as he made his way around the hold. He ran his hand over the crates and barrels Thatch had stored throughout the crowded room. He knew Thatch had been quite successful the last several months, harassing the trading vessels coming to and from the New World. There were rumors that Thatch was known to stop at various small islands and atolls around the Carolina coast to bury portions of his plunder, careful to ensure it wasn't being stored in just one place. It was hard to believe that even more existed outside of the treasure-crowded hold in which he now stood. A sly smile formed on his lips as he caught the eye of Charlotte while she watched him case the room. She was definitely a desire that he would seek to satisfy once they were all back on land in the port of Nassau this evening. His hand touched the cool stones of the jeweled cross that hung from a cord around his neck. He felt an odd shiver course through his body as he strode past the many chests while Charlotte squinted at him. "Where is Thatch, for God's sake?" Jennings bellowed. Black Caesar was in the process of passing out cupfuls of wine from several pitch-black bottles and held one out to Jennings, who ham-fisted it from him, sloshing the dark crimson-colored liquid to the wooden floor. Black Caesar stared momentarily as it slowly seeped between a slim gap in the floorboards as Jennings stomped away. Vane took one of the cups from Thatch's first mate and held it out for a pour. Black Caesar accommodated, and in a quick gulp, Vane swallowed the wine with a grimace and held the cup for another round. "Where the devil did this come from?" Vane asked as Caesar moved on. "It burns horribly, but with a touch of sweetness." Vane focused his bleary stare on Anne Bonny. "Just as Anne would taste, I'd say." Vane nudged his elbow into the side of Jack Rackham. Anne retorted with a rude gesture that sent many to laugh. "Can we get on with this meeting, Hornigold?" Jennings said, turning toward the architect of the pirate kingdom of Nassau. "I can only imagine what nonsense Thatch will have to say regarding the pardon in hand." Hornigold looked around the room at the expectant faces and cleared his throat. "We've all had a chance to read or have the king's pardon read to us," he began. "Imposter king!" Thatch's deep-toned voice boomed from the doorway as all heads turned to see his figure backlighted by the brightly lit oil lamps framing the entrance. Thatch held the silence, or more accurately, relished the silence his statement initiated. He then sauntered into the grand hold, and several pirates gave way as he brushed past them to stand in front of the crowd, with the boxes of shimmering loot behind him. The German-born King George, offers us this weak document in hopes that some of us will jump at the chance to bend the knee once again. He claims we can keep our plunder, crimes against the crown, and its interest forgiven and forgotten. All we must do is give up piracy. We must disband the haven we've created, that Hornigold has created, and allow the dreaded pirate hunter Woodes Rogers to ascend to the governorship of our beloved Nassau. "You'd rather we were hunted down by the Royal Navy for the rest of our lives?" exclaimed Jennings. "We not only have the English crown to attend to, but Spain, France, the Dutch, and now, thanks to you, releasing the slaves bound for Virginia and the Carolinas, we have those governors wanting our heads as well. We've all become rich this past year, at least if you didn't spend all your take on whoring and drink. I say we take the pardon and count ourselves lucky." That's an easy choice for a plantation owner to make. Easy to retire when one has land and title, said Mary Reed. There were many grumblings through the crowd as each voiced an opinion. Hornigold stepped forward, gesturing with his hands for quiet. "It's true I had designed this republic as a new beginning for those of us who were cast aside by our beloved England," he began. "Not so beloved to those of us Irish," laughed Anne Bonny, interrupting. Many joined in with the jest, as some attending were Irish, African, and Scots. "Fine, fine, beloved for some of us," said Hornigold. "We were abandoned throughout the Caribbean when the Three Crowns made peace, while most of us sailors had no way of going home. We all saw opportunity, and we took it. We decided to continue doing what we do best. During the war, we were privateers with the blessing of King George. Now we are all pirates. Pirates that King George relished as he looked the other way while we plundered the merchants of Spain, France, and the Netherlands. This republic was to be a haven where any man or woman could raise their station, a place you could arrive without a pot to piss in, and through your hard work, cunning, and grit, carve out a life with freedom and success. We've done that. Together. Look at you all. I would imagine that none in this room would have believed they would have achieved so much. But some, and I'll put my foot forward to be included, got greedy. We became tempted by the fat merchants that sailed from our beloved," said with a smirk and wink at Anne, "England, and began to bite the hand that held the whip. We have all done well, as Jennings has said, and it is my opinion that we take our spoils and begin a new life, a life that doesn't end with our necks in a noose." "This pardon is a kraken," Thatch roared. A kraken meant to wrap its rubbery tentacles around our hearts and drag us under the sea to a watery grave. "Do you not see the fallacy of it, Hornigold? It is meant to divide us. German George knows good and well some of our rank will jump at the chance for forgiveness. Divided, we are weakened, easy pickings. But if we stand together, we have the strength of 3 navies. I command over 200 of the strongest, fiercest, best-trained sailors ever to roam these waters. Together with Hornigold, Rackham, Sam Bellamy, Steed, and Jennings, there is a combined total in the thousands." Thatch pointed to each man with his cup of wine. "I say we stand our ground, retain our rights and independence. Together we could bring the crown to its knees." Thatch raised his cup in a toast and downed the liquor in one giant mouthful. The divided crowd erupted in both cheers and dissent. Jennings and Hornigold shared a look together, even though there was no love lost between the two. Jennings turned to his drunken first mate Vane, who he knew had no desire to sign the pardon and give up his life of piracy. It was easy to see that Vane agreed with Thatch. Jennings's mood darkened as his life was becoming too complicated and dangerous to attach himself any longer to this lot. He desired nothing more than to disband his crew of 500 thieves and degenerates and sail home to the Bahamas. He was in fact a plantation owner and had no more need for the treasure that had driven him into this life after the end of the war. As unwilling as he was last year to give up the command of a ship, he was now unwilling to sail with the threat of the English Navy behind every cove and squall he encountered. In truth, he avoided fighting alongside these lesser ungodly men, choosing to pursue the easy prey that would give up before combat, or to plunder the recent wrecks that occurred throughout the reefs, rocks, and sandbars of the Caribbean Sea. Hornigold, who once was his second in command during the war, felt the same. They had spoken days before, agreeing that they must find a way to convince their brethren to sign the pardon in order to preserve their influence on the profitable trading port that Nassau had become. If Thatch and the rest of these bastards and whores continued to pirate these waters, they would force the Crown to send a large armada to control the ports and shipping lanes to deal with them. If that happened, then his and Hornigold's hold on Nassau would be threatened. Jennings looked over at the monster that was Edward Thatch. Wine was dripping from his long braided beard as he laughed and was patted on the back by Sam Bellamy. He despised them both, partly out of jealousy, as they were two of the most successful pirates ever known. Bellamy, he mused, was just lucky. He was an excellent sailor but did not have what it took to run a ship with an iron fist. Bellamy was a true believer of the pirate republic ideals. He fancied himself a Robin Hood, known for his mercy and generosity. Young and an idealist, that one. It was told to Jennings that Bellamy had pursued piracy in the hopes of earning enough money to win the approval of his love's father up in Cape Cod. Bellamy was a street rat that wanted to marry into a proper upper-class family, and Jennings could understand exactly why the girl's father would never allow it. No matter how much money a rat could steal, a rat he would still be. Thatch, though, was something else altogether. He arrived in Nassau as a mystery of sorts. It was apparent that he was an educated man, well-read, and an adept war technician that one would dread to come up against in battle. Jennings had overheard him converse in as many as 6 languages, yet the debauchery that he was capable of would bring a blush to the cheeks of the devil himself. Whereas Jennings's first mate, Vane, was a tool of violence to be used by someone with intelligence and wit, Thatch was an instrument of destruction that could not be controlled, and could possibly outsmart you at every turn. Jennings knew he should not take chances when dealing with that one. Best to leave him for Hornigold to clash with, and maybe both would do each other in on their own. Jennings was about to take a drink of the rich, dark wine in his cup when he felt the ship rise and fall from the crest of a wave. He managed to keep from spilling the liquid only from the years of experience one acquired from living aboard ships and coping with the mundane challenges of eating, drinking, and shitting without solid ground underneath your feet. The size of the wave struck him as odd as they were anchored in a bay. It must have seemed unusual to the rest of the seasoned pirates, as everyone in the room paused what they were doing and stood in abrupt silence. The noise of the rain and wind, as well as the creaking of the wooden vessel, seemed amplified by the hush that went through the hold. Then the ship rose and fell on the crest of an even larger wave that sent all of them grabbing something to steady themselves. Jennings looked over at Thatch and saw his wild eyes widen and turn to Black Caesar. "Topside!" Thatch commanded. Black Caesar was the first to climb the stairwell with Thatch behind him. The rest crowded the narrow exit to follow them up as another wave drove the ship high in the air at an odd angle before crashing down with a loud bang as the hull must have lifted out of the water to come slamming down on the surface of the sea. Those still left out in the open went sliding down, banging their bodies against the floor and beams. Jennings found himself knocked to the floor. The crates that hadn't been secured skidded about, and one narrowly missed smashing into Jennings' legs as he quickly pulled them to his chest. He shot to his feet as soon as the ship righted itself and shoved his way up the stairwell and onto the main deck. Thatch was shouting orders as Jennings once again lost his footing on the slick surface, wet with rain. He looked in shock as he was assaulted by the howling wind, pelting downpour, and the force of waves as they crested the frigate's railing. Jennings rushed to starboard and searched for the lights of Nassau. Blackness engulfed the horizon. He pushed his way past the frenzy of pirates arriving on the main deck. Darkness was the only thing to be seen beyond the rolling sea. "Hoist the main!" Thatch shouted as he climbed the ladder to the aft castle and took the wheel. He continued to shout orders that were echoed by the collection of captains and first mates, as they were all well-trained sailors who knew every job aboard a ship this size. Stede Bonny made his way to the aft castle and yelled to be heard against the raging wind, "Who pulled anchor, and why?" "I don't bloody know," growled Thatch. "We were goddamn anchored in the harbor," yelled Jennings as he mounted the ladder to the aft castle. "How the bloody hell do you explain we find ourselves in the middle of the damn ocean, Thatch?" They all were rocked when a wave slammed into the ship with enough force to throw them both against the large mahogany wheel. The water that drenched them roiled over the deck to empty out on the other side. Thatch pushed Jennings away from the wheel as they regained their footing. "Find a job and do it," he said. Black Caesar appeared at the top of the ladder. "Anchor lines were cut," he told Thatch. "Cut? By who?" Jennings demanded. Black Caesar just shook his head. "Who would cut the anchors, and why?" Stede questioned. They were suddenly lifted into the air, weightless. The Queen Anne's Revenge was thrown completely out of the water, tossed like a twig by a 30-foot wave. For the pirates, it seemed as though time stood still, while they all hung in the air, a foot above the safety of the ship's deck. The frigate hit the water below a mere second before its crew came crashing down against the hardwood flooring, soaked with salt water. Lightning cracked all around them, sending ozone and electrified droplets prickling over their exposed skin. Jennings pulled himself to his feet and was about to scream an obscenity at Thatch when he spotted an enormous shadow looming in the distance. No sound escaped his lips, but his excited eyes, haunted expression, and pointed finger caught Thatch's attention. Edward Thatch turned to see the forming of a 50-foot wall of water closing in on them. With urgency, he spun the wheel of the ship to point the bow to face the oncoming wave head-on. "Come about!" Thatch screamed, and the crew responded frantically, working the rigging to turn the ship into the behemoth. At first, it seemed the bow had dug into the bottom of the wave and was forcing the ship down into the sea to be crushed. But as the wave grew beneath the ship, they started to climb. Thatch was the picture of a man gone mad, his hair and beard plastered back by the gale force of the wind, his eyes wild and mouth open in a half-scream, half-laugh. He steered the frigate up, climbing the seemingly endless wall of water. The wave towered over the ship, threatening to curl over it and pound it to the bottom of the sea. Anne Bonny held the rigging of the aft sail in hopes of not falling backward over the railing into the roiling sea below. Her location meant she was the last of the crew to climb to the top of the wave. From her view, it seemed the world had fallen away as the Queen Anne's Revenge crested, pivoted, then began its thundering descent down the other side. She searched for her new love, Jack Rackham, across the crowded deck, but couldn't pick him out among the drenched figures cloaked in the darkness of the starless night. Anne fretted that he may have been tossed overboard to drown in the churning waters, as she had seen happen to several others in these last minutes of hell. Her heart ached at the thought, and tears streamed down her face, mixing with the salty sea water that coated the rest of her hair and skin. The horrifying sea below caught her attention, as it looked so foreign that she didn't trust her eyes. Their ship was speeding down the backside of the monster wave they just ascended, yet it seemed there was no end to their descent. The water below them spun in a giant funnel so large that she struggled to see the other side. By all rights, they should have slipped down the backside of the wave, only to be tossed again by another, but there seemed to be no bottom in sight. A scream escaped her lips as the ship was caught up in the spinning whirlpool, accelerating it around and around, sucking the Queen Anne's Revenge and all its passengers down into its gaping mouth and into the unfathomable darkness below.
And so concludes Chapter 1 of Pirates of the Wild West. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you're intrigued enough to stick around for Chapter 2 and beyond. I'm going to release these episodes. I'll release episodes every Monday, although I might intersperse the feed with new Pirate Republic content, such as pirate history, pirate events, things like that. If you have any questions or comments, you can email me at darkgravitystudios@gmail.com. And if you haven't subscribed to the weekly newsletter, The Pirate Republic, you should go to thepiraterepublic.com and do that. That is a newsletter that comes out every Friday, and it has pirate history, pirate events, everything a fan of pirates would enjoy. For now, I wish you farewell, and we'll sail together soon as the tides permit.